Hi, this is Rabbi J. Michaelson. One thing I love about this anguished prayer by the Kedushat Levy, Rabbi Levy Yitzchak of Berditchev, is its many contradictions. On the one hand, it's a din Torah, a religious lawsuit, basically accusing God of oppressing his people and breaking his promises. Yet on the other hand, it's filled with loving familial language. God here is the Tatenu Zisr, dear father, even dear daddy. The text is filled with grief, yet also a kind of resolute determination. And most of all, for me, the text teaches me a contradictory, complex relationship that many of us in the 21st century, myself included, have toward traditional texts like this, toward traditional God language, theodicy, theology, really the entire worldview that holds that somehow, in some way, an anthropomorphic God is responsible for what happens to us. That is a worldview in which I do not believe. Yet this prayer or poem or plaintiff's brief teaches me how to read texts like this. As the poet Adrian Rich said, it's like diving into the wreck, looking for treasures or trying to read a book in which our names do not appear. The wreck for me is this entire worldview that God is a father-like figure, a big daddy in the sky who's supposed to be in charge. After all, this lawsuit is alleging that a law has been violated. And here that law is that God is a bad king. Unlike the kings of earthly nations who protect their subjects, God commands but does not protect. He's broken his promises. He said to love us, but he has abandoned us to profound suffering. Obviously, this is a longstanding religious idea. And interestingly, the responsibility of the good king is something pretty interesting. We sometimes miss it when we rightly critique the authoritarianism of monarchic imagery like this. But it is part of the problem. For example, during the pandemic, many of the most religious Americans, evangelical Christians, Hasidic Jews, were the least morally scrupulous when it came to protecting the health of others. Statistically speaking, they didn't mask up as much, didn't stop having in-person religious gatherings, and didn't get vaccinated at far higher rates than the overall American population. One of the reasons that they gave when asked is that they said, ultimately, God is in charge. If it's my time to go, it's God's will. Another reason, against all evidence, is that they said God will protect us, precisely the responsibility that the Kedushat Levy here says God has abrogated. People died as a result of these beliefs. Thousands of people, perhaps tens of thousands, including many prominent Haredi rabbis. Now, fortunately, there are other traditions within Jewish history as well. The Rambam, Maimonides, for example, was a philosopher, physician, rationalist, and of course, a Jewish sage without parallel. For the Rambam, God is that which has ordered the natural world, which now behaves according to laws which we can do our best to understand. And that's our ethical responsibility. It's not a cosmic king deciding who lives and who dies. It's the laws of nature. It's not prayer that will cure me of COVID-19. It's science. Another example in Jewish tradition is Zionism, which, whatever its other features, was in large part an effort to end oppression of Jews by human means. Levy Yitzchak files an imaginary lawsuit against an imaginary king, but in the same century, Jewish socialists, Zionists, and others fought to end their own oppression in earthly ways. Now, of course, evil knows no such boundaries. Hasidim, socialist Zionists, and every other kind of Jew were murdered in the Holocaust. But in a contemporary progressive context, if you want to end oppression, you pray with your feet, as Abraham Joshua Heschel said, not just with your mouths. You take action. Don't ask God to do it. Don't send thoughts and prayers. Go and do the work. Levy Yitzchak's pain here is lovely. The pain, the intimacy, the anger, but ultimately the demand that God do something is hard to sustain, especially post-COVID, when so many people with that view endangered themselves and the rest of us, all while saying it's up to God. But it isn't, at least not in the dualistic sense as I see it. The God whose hands it is in is the God in the minds of the scientists who did help end this plague, and in the hearts of mothers and teachers and healthcare workers. The God that evangelicals and Haredim were praying to, that projection of a wish for a king daddy who would keep us safe, no amount of contrary evidence can shake that. And ironically, it seems to miss the force for good that was so much in evidence during the pandemic. There's something poignant in that yearning, but ultimately I feel separated from it by a vast chasm. Personally, to the extent I even continue to use the word God, it's in opposition to this cosmic monarch daddy. It refers to the sum total of the Sat Chit Ananda, the Yud He Vav He, the being, consciousness, bliss, the isness, the chokhmah, and the ahava rabbah, the wisdom and the love that suffuses the universe as we sometimes understand it. Daddy God is not going to save us if we change the climate. We have to change our ways. Daddy God is not going to magically erase injustice, nationalism, and racism. We have to change our ways. And Daddy God is not going to avert the Holocaust, not going to stop COVID, not going to side with our team against the people we think are on the other team. We have to build the world with equal parts love and intellect, with mature ethical reasoning and profound compassion, not wishful thinking. That daddy metaphor, once powerful, is what Nietzsche proclaimed to be dead, and thank God for that. And yet, that is not the endpoint of my relationship with this prayer, because there is beauty in the pain, the rage, and the love. And while I can't agree with Rabbi Levy Yitzchak's view of the world, while indeed I find it actively harmful, I can perhaps imagine the depth of his emotion. He's pained by suffering. He's torn between his love of God and his love of the people God seems to have abandoned. And that is a disposition of the heart that I love. The theology, for me, may be a shipwreck, but the treasure is that breaking of the heart that Cantor Berger renders so beautifully here.
Guten Morgen, dir Ribono shel Olam. Ich, Levy Yitzchak ben Sur mi Berditchev, bin gekommen zu dir mit deiner Toyre von dein Volk Israel. Was hast du zu deinem Volk Israel? Und was hast du sich angesetzt auf dein Volk Israel? Also was nur Razach ist es Zaves Bnei Israel. Hazavu norakok ezamor el bnei Yisroel. Hazavu noravort ezadaber el bnei Yisroel. Taten you, come on, mois. Parasaim, Bavalaim, Adamaim. Die Engländer sagen, Hazeir Malchus is a Malchus. Die Italiener was sagen, Hazeir König is a König. Und ich, Levy Yitzchak ben Sur mi Berditchev sag, Amen. Levy Yitzchak ben Sur mi Berditchev zog Lo yailach mi makoyemi Ich will von Ort nicht weggehen und ein Eck soll es nehmen. Und das Sofa soll es schöner sein. Is gadol, ve'is gadol.